Welcome to the Talent Development Hot Seat. I'm your host, Andy Storch, and I'm excited that you are joining me today for another great episode and conversation to help you up your game and improve your capabilities in the world of talent development. And I've got a great one for you today because we are talking all about trends and the future of work and what is going on in the world of talent development. My guest is my good friend Al D, who is a talent and leadership development consultant, researcher, facilitator, and keynote speaker. He runs The Edge of Work, a talent and leadership consulting firm that helps organizations develop their leaders and design talent strategies equipped to perform in a changing world of work. Al works at the intersection of the future of work, talent, and leadership development, a great place to be. His insights have been published in outlets such as Forbes, Fast Company, and Business Insider. He's also the host of the Edge of Work podcast, where I have been a guest a couple times, which explores the future of work and leadership. And he's also a LinkedIn top voice in the future of work leadership. And Al has previously been a guest on this podcast way back on episode number 311, which came out in May of 2022, called The 6 Important Trends in Professional Development. And Al is a good friend of mine. As I mentioned, Al, you're someone that I always look to as being on the cutting edge, talking with people all the time as I am to find out what's going on, what are people working on, where are things going, what does the future of work look like? So I'm always excited to talk with you. So welcome back to the show, Al.
Andy, it's always great to talk with you, and thanks for having me back. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, and I should also mention you also spoke at the last Talent Development Think Tank conference. We've gotten to, I think we met through LinkedIn and through podcasting years ago, but we've also met up at multiple conferences, ATD, 2 Talent Development Think Tank conferences. I met up with you and your wife on your honeymoon. We have that kind of relationship, right? We've hosted some virtual networking calls together for people in the entrepreneurial space and the talent development space. And I think we both have a common drive and curiosity to really know what's going on and help people figure out where things are going. So that's one place we're going to go today. But you recently published a report on sort of the biggest trends in talent development, leadership development. And I'm curious, you spoke with, I think, 40 talent and learning leaders across Fortune 1000 organizations for that report. And I'm curious, what came out of that? What are the big things that came out? What's top of mind for people right now? And then we'll dive into some of the bigger trends or some of the deeper topics.
No, thank you for the question. I mean, and I think Andy, you might be able to appreciate this, but in the work that I do each day, whether it's doing actual talent and leadership development programs, facilitating workshops, as well as talking with folks on the Edge of Work podcast and just other conversations, one of the most common questions I get back, which I'm sure you might get a lot, is what are other people doing or what are other people kind of working on? And it started to become one of those things where in my as I quote unquote get older, I was starting to have a really hard time remembering all the different conversations I was having because I was fortunate to be in so many of them. And
Mm.
so the idea for this report actually came from partially selfishly wanting to try to solidify and codify some of the ideas that kind of kept coming up in the conversations that I was having, putting some synthesis around it and kind of wrapping it up in a way that people could consume. Because to your point, I am fortunate enough to be in a lot of conversations with talent and learning leaders. And so that really was the idea behind the report and, kind of jumping in and getting into a little bit of the headlines, so to speak, if you will. There's a lot in the report. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. There's a lot going on in there, but let me share a couple just to start off the conversation, and
Yeah.
then we can kind of go from there. So context, did about 30 to 45-minute interviews with Fortune 1000 talent and learning leaders throughout the course of the summer of 2025 and the fall of 2025, really focused on 3 or 4 key areas. The first was, what are your current priorities? The second was around leadership development. The third was around AI, and specifically AI as it relates to talent and learning. And then the last kind of category was around the future of the talent and learning profession. So those were kind of the 4 categories and 4 themes, and kind of asked a series of questions in each of those. But let me just share a couple of the key findings that kind of came top of mind. So I think the first one to me was this idea around change. And in every conversation I've had come up, and in many of the conversations I know that you have on this podcast, that topic comes up quite a bit.
Mm.
And I wanted to go further on that though, because it's something that I think is easy to say, but I wanted to really try to understand, well, what does that mean or what does that look like? And so within this idea of change, one of the things I found was that it almost was coming kind of almost in like, I will call it like 5 different like flavors of change, so to speak, in terms of what that actually kind of like looked like. So the five, and I'll just kind of share them on the top of my head. So one is
Mm.
kind of your traditional change management. So think about leading or rolling out a new system, a new tool, new software, or new process, and the change kind of management efforts that go with that. The second was this idea of always on change. So the sense of we're going through a rapidly changing and evolving time, and we're making progress towards some kind of change that's happening, but we know that this change in front of us is going to evolve, but we still have to put calories towards that effort. The third was around this idea as it relates to change for leadership development. And so this idea in context was we are, through our leadership development efforts, trying to create a culture where we have leaders who can lead change or who are capable of exhibiting the ability to drive change for their people and on their teams. And so this was all about how do we kind of reset around values or behaviors or leadership behaviors to make them more relevant for being able to lead change. The fourth one, excuse me, was around kind of an interesting kind of notion, this idea of acute change versus chronic change, right?
Mm.
And so if you think about kind of a illness or a sickness of some kind, something that is acute is you kind of feel it in the here and now. It's like right there. So this is kind of the change that's right in front of you. And then the chronic change is kind of like that it's there, right? It's not going away anytime soon, and you kind of know it's always going to kind of be there. And this one was around how do we kind of manage those kind of two together. And then the last one was just kind of like I have to lead a change myself, and
Mm.
this is really hard. And how do I kind of manage both first myself so that I can go and perhaps like lead change for others. So the first kind of theme was around this idea of change. I would say
Yeah.
like the second one is this idea of what I've been calling the two timelines. And so one of the things that was really interesting to hear leaders talk about was that a lot of these folks were working on priorities that were related to things that feel very futuristic in the sense of being able to think about what does it look like in a world where talent is humans, but also
Mm.
talent might be in the form of systems or machines or robots, et cetera. And how do you kind of design processes, systems to kind of manage that? And then the other timeline is kind of the here and now, which is kind of the stuff we're doing today. And in some cases, it might feel like stuff that we need to do, but feels a little outdated. And so the best analogy I could
Yeah.
kind of come up with this is that one gentleman said to me, I just had a day where in one meeting, I was going to talking about a readout of how we were able to decommission 6,000 compliance courses that were no longer needed. And in the next
Mm.
meeting, I was talking about AI and humans and machines. And so
Yeah.
kind of this idea of like, it feels like where I'm in two different worlds at the same time. And then the last one is this concept of what I call the barbell, which is when I asked folks about kind of the future of the profession and what skills would kind of matter for folks that worked in talent and learning, we kind of came on two ends. On one end of the barbell was something that was deeply tech. So think of all the systems, tools, et cetera, that people are going to need to know how to use and manage. And then the other side was deeply human. And so how do you kind of really understand human behavior and how humans change behavior and things like that? And so,
Mm.
and when it comes to kind of what we might need to focus on in the future, there's kind of the two barbells on that end. So those were kind of three themes. I know I talked for a while, so I'm going to stop and I'll let
Yeah.
you kind of take whichever ones of those sound interesting.
Well, thank you, Al. I'm taking notes over here because there's so much in there to dive into. I know people listening are thinking like, okay, I can resonate with a lot of these things. I definitely have questions. Let's start with the first theme around change. I'm thinking as I say that because I've done 600 episodes of this podcast. I've done had lots of conversations with heads of talent over the years, like you, and I feel like a few years ago, some people might say we're going through a change or transformation. It might be 20% of the people I talk with. And now it feels like 90%. Like everybody's just going through some type of it's leadership change, it's strategy change, it's technology implementation. It feels like we're so much in a state of change that people aren't even really bringing it up anymore because it's kind of become normalized. Do you feel like that's the case as well? And how do people shift their way of working? Do we even need, there was a big need around change management before. Is that still a need, or is it just something that's always going on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a couple things in there. I think to the extent that I think everyone is kind of, to the extent that there is an element of this that where change just becomes part of the background noise in the operating environment that we're in. I think to a certain degree, that is true in many organizations and in many, I would say, industries or functions, so to speak. I think about tech as certainly being one of those that comes to mind, or specifically within tech, something like software engineering right now. That particular function is going through so much change and so
Mm-hmm.
much just with all the new tools and technologies that are available as a result of advancements in AI, machine learning, in hardware, software, et cetera. So there is an element of this where, to your point, it stops becoming something you talk about because it just starts becoming part of the environment and context that you're in. That said, one of the things that remains true, I believe, is that humans are still human and are always going to be
Mm-hmm.
human. And the reality of it is, for many of us, even if we are accustomed to change, or even if it does become part of the operating rhythm of our business, change can be really hard for us as humans because
Mm-hmm.
it can threaten our survival, right? And so I still think that there is going to be an element where, even if this does become more of the norms in your organization, where it's still going to be challenging. I think to your interesting, this actually came up a couple times with different conversations to your question around change management and if it still is a thing. Where this actually came up quite a bit was where a number of people said to me that while many of the traditional change management methodologies and frameworks have been helpful over the past, 2, 3, 4, 5 decades,
Mm-hmm.
they did not necessarily see them as useful in the context of today and moving forward. And a number of people actually said, I think we need a new paradigm for how we think about how we manage change. I mean, some people went as far to say, like, I don't know if we should even call it managing change. I'm not necessarily going to get too caught up in the words behind it, but I think the spirit of it rings true, which is that we live and work in a much more dynamic and complex environment where a lot of things are interconnected, and having a static process that is repeatable and consistent may not necessarily apply in the same way that it once did. And so there's a little bit of nuance to in the answer to your question, but I would say, like, the net of it is that I do think that change hits a little bit differently, and as a result of that, people are experiencing and feeling it in different ways.
Yeah. And there's the bigger macro change, and then there's micro change that goes on for people as well. And I just had a conversation earlier today with someone that, a mutual friend of ours who works in, I would say, a mid-level L&D role in a big company. And she said, I'm on my fourth boss. I'm about to have my fifth manager in 2 years. And this is something that I hear fairly often, like, oh, roles are changing. I'm on different teams. At what point do we just go to project-based work, which is something I wrote about in my first book 5 years ago, and we're not quite there yet, but this could be a good lead in also to the idea of building more of a skills-based, talent approach, which is sort of that buzzword that's been really popular in 2026 or 2025 and ongoing. I'm curious how much that came up and what you're hearing from people in terms of like upskilling, talent pipeline, how you get, the right people to the right roles or the right projects, et cetera, these days.
Yeah, I would say that in bits and pieces, the aspiration is absolutely there in terms of what some of these initiatives, what the outcomes they tend to deliver on. I think the aspiration and the interest is absolutely there. I think the reality of it is for that in many organizations, even many who are trying to do some of these things, there is so much, ironically enough, change management that is needed to be done to the ways in which people think about talent, the mindsets that they have around performance and what performance means, how the mindset of what does it mean to be a manager or people leader. I mean, I think that one of the biggest barriers in terms of moving to more of a project-based kind of work, or kind of a little bit more of a fluid talent mobility kind of approach, is that direct relationship between an employee and a manager, right? Because if you're going to eventually move towards this kind of more fluid talent marketplace,
Yeah.
there's a lot more agency that's put on the employee and a little bit less on the direct manager, because the employee will kind of move around. And so I think there is in some pockets, certainly a desire to do this. And I think a lot of times the thing that kind of harkens it back to is this idea of agility in terms of wanting to be able to move faster. And then the other place where it kind of comes up, quite a bit sometimes is this, when you do get into organizations or potentially also within industries where there are either hot skills or capabilities that are needed and kind of you need to surge on something and you want to be able to move in a quick way to be able to do this, whether it is relying internally on upskilling or whether it's, finding ways to kind of bring in the right talent that can do that. Or if they're just in an industry or a function where the talent is actually scarce and you want to be able to have a little bit more flexibility with how you're able to match the outcomes that need to be achieved with the capabilities and skills to do them. The one thing I will say that kind of came up quite a bit, and I think this is part of when you do kind of, a broad kind of set of interviews with 40 learning and talent leaders, you do get a wide diversity of people's roles and remits. To your question about pipelines, I did talk to quite a few folks, more so on the talent and talent management side of the house, that were doing some interesting work and interesting things around their leadership pipeline in terms of, really asking themselves, do we have, do we know what the right bench of our leaders looks like, and do we have the right leaders for the future of our organization? And for that matter, let's just say that we do, how do we make sure they get the requisite development opportunities as well as whatever else is needed so that they can step into those roles? And oh, by the way, the cycle times for how we do these pipelines and things like that are getting shorter and shorter because the environment is moving much more faster in a dynamic way. So again, aspiration, I think, for what you're mentioning is absolutely there, but there is, a little bit of change management work that we have to do to kind of actualize on some of these, just because we've been kind of working in this kind of talent model that we've had for quite some time. And it just takes time to get there on that.
It's a longer process. I go to these conferences and I listen to podcasts and I hear people talking about the skills-based approach, and we're going to be a skills-based organization. And I haven't seen any great proof yet that anyone's completely made that transformation. I think it's a long-term evolution that a lot of companies and people are on to figure out how do we categorize or catalog skills that we have, figure out skills that we need, move people into roles or maybe gigs that address those more than the traditional long-term roles. And I would imagine you're hearing something similar.
No, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, and kind of to try to make this simple for folks. There are companies that do this. A lot of them are called small and medium-sized businesses.
Right. Startup.
They don't necessarily need maybe it's not codified, maybe it's not in a system anywhere, but they're really good at being able to do this. I think it just, where this gets really hairy and really difficult is in large enterprises for a lot of very understandable, reasons, right? But if you want to see how this kind of works in action in a very kind of rudimentary kind of way, go to your local coffee shop, go to your local baker, go to your local service firm, service provider of choice. They do this all the time out of necessity. Like they don't have a, they don't have a choice, right? And so I think to your point though, your point still stands that like this is incredibly difficult, and it's not so foreign that we have no idea in concept what it looks like. It's just to be able to do this at scale is really challenging.
Yeah, it just takes time. Okay, you mentioned managers and leaders. Many leaders in your survey mentioned that managers are being asked to do more without sufficient support, which everybody can relate to, right? What are the most innovative or effective ways you've seen organizations or heard about organizations helping managers to succeed today?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it's a couple things. I would say the first thing is just kind of acknowledging it, right? In terms of the acknowledgement that we are asking a lot of our managers, and if we are going to hold them accountable for a lot, we also need to make sure we provide them with the right kind of support so that they can actually do the things that we need them to do, because again, it's a lot. And so I think there's that in terms of like the actual mindset shift. I think the other thing that is kind of interesting to see in how companies are starting to approach this is that I have seen a couple companies start to really kind of think about manager development almost as a system, versus necessarily a program or something that kind of you do episodically. And so in that system is putting a team or a series of people who are focused on how do we make sure that our managers are delivering on their goals and capabilities. And in that is development, but in that is also rewards. In that is also TA and hiring, and thinking about how do we make sure the managers know how to hire. in that is also, being able to align both kind of the development needs as well as making sure that managers are selected in the right ways. In that is also thinking about how do we make sure that we're supporting them throughout the talent and performance cycle. And so you kind of have, in some cases, in some organizations, a team that kind of has taken on management. And if you think about how a manager moves through kind of that it's day-to-day kind of experience of trying to support them throughout that, which is of course inclusive of your traditional development, but there's a lot more to that. And it's just, I think, a more acknowledgement that development is one piece, but in order to actually get managers to do things you need them to do, you actually have to think about it a little bit more holistically. I think another thing that I've seen that has been kind of interesting has been kind of how do we find more ways to give managers the support tools, whether that and tools could be data, it could be technology, so that they can do their jobs. A number of organizations I talked to were rolling out some form of AI coaching or AI role plays to help managers prepare or get guidance at the point of need, whether that was to practice a really difficult conversation, whether that was to be able to get feedback on something they're trying to get ready for, and just making those kind of things more accessible to people leaders so that they can show up and be effective, in a specific moment, or get feedback that they need in real time versus having to wait for a formal development program. The
Right.
third kind of thing, again, is like the data piece, right? And I know a number of organizations, more so in the tech world, but one of the things that they've done is they have tried to make kind of accessible tools, systems, and data available to managers so that managers can use that to make better, decisions in terms of the work that they do each and every day. And so the obvious thing would be around employee engagement data, just to help them understand kind of the health of their team. But the other thing that I've seen that has been kind of interesting is around a couple organizations I talked to were actually running experiments around kind of, hey, like we think this intervention that a manager could do could be really helpful in terms of it could be this kind of type of small career conversation. It could be like, hey, like if we had a bunch of managers encourage their employees to do this thing each and every day. And so then they would run a test on that and with a control group and like in a group that did it. And if they found it valid, what they would then do is that they would share and disseminate those insights with managers and say, hey, we ran this experiment. Here's what we found. We think this could be helpful for you. You should maybe go think about if you could go and do this. And then they would give them a lightweight tool to go and do that thing. And so it's just kind of like trying to find more ways to reach their managers and give them tools that they can use to be more effective in their day-to-day outside of all the traditional kinds of things that you would rely on for your managers. The one thing I will say that I was maybe aspirationally hoping for, but didn't necessarily hear, but I think could be valuable, is taking stuff off their plate. Because I think that could be helpful, but I think I also understand that's really hard to do. So
It's hard to do, but if we had an honest conversation about what management, what leadership is about in companies,
Sure.
I believe at its core, leadership is about enabling and empowering people to succeed, both short-term in their roles today and long-term in their careers. And that if a leader actually gets to focus most of their time on leading, on, that's what I'm looking for, enabling people to do the work and not focused on their own work because they have their own tasks and IC stuff they got to do in addition to leading, and encourage them just to have more of those conversations to lead their team. And you're going to have a better performance as a result.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm right there with you.
You mentioned AI, of course. We can't have a conversation about what's going on in the world of talent development or the latest trends, future of work, without talking about AI. In fact, you devoted a whole section of your report to AI. And given that AI is being talked about a lot in every conversation right now, I'm sure it came up in many of the conversations you had. Curious if you discovered anything that was new or unique or especially relevant to people working in talent development right now.
Sure. So the report kind of goes into detail about 5 different, I would say, initiatives or work streams, if you will, that I found talent and learning leaders kind of being involved in AI. And being involved could be leading it, it could be supporting it, it could be being a key stakeholder in it, it could be being kind of an informed party in it. I won't go through all of those right now, but I will highlight a couple things that did kind of come up as I was kind of going through some of the report. So I think one of the things that really came top of mind was getting some more granular kind of insights into what's happening on the ground. As an example, Andy, you may have seen this, but in October, I believe this year, one of the centers at MIT famously came out with this study, and based off of kind of their experiments and kind of the structure of the study, they found, or the conclusion they came to was that 95% of AI initiatives were not generating the value that they had intended it to generate. And so you kind of see a headline like that and you're wondering yourself like, wow, either A, that's a really high failure rate, or like, wow, we must really be in the early stage because they haven't been able to really get past that 5%. But when you actually have some conversations with people on the ground, let's just say for a second that number is accurate, which I don't really believe it is, but let's just say it is. There's a lot more nuance in there. And let me give you an example. I remember talking with a woman who was heading up the learning and development for a financial services, a mid-sized financial services firm. And one of the things that she was telling me was that the CEO of the organization was championing AI in all of his communications, was really encouraging it, was telling everyone, you need to use AI. This is the future. It needs to be part of your role. You need to find ways to make it useful. In
Right.
most respects, like that is, if that's the direction of the company, that is what you want your CEO to say. That said, the same CEO was not in favor of doing any type of AI adoption, AI enablement efforts, despite the fact that this head of learning development, all of her stakeholders and all the functional functions were literally asking, hey, we need help in our group around AI adoption and enablement, right? And so taking that back to the 95% number, like, let's just say that this company is quote unquote failing. It's not failing because they don't see the value in AI. It's not failing because there aren't literal people that want support with it. It's just that there's organizational tensions around these things that sometimes make this stuff a lot more complex than just simply just looking at something of, is it generating value or not? So that's like one example. On the positive side of things, the people I talk to who seem to be more kind of confident in their efforts around how they were helping kind of lead AI adoption and enablement in the organization, they tended to do two things. The first thing that they tended to do is that they tended to be much more precise in their efforts. What that usually meant was they were going function by function or business unit by business unit to do enablement or adoption efforts. And what this allowed them to do was to work directly with the function itself to figure out, for marketing or for finance, what are the actual most identifiable opportunities where AI could help enhance the work that we're doing today? And then thinking about how can we use AI to do that specific to that function. And I think anytime you can make something a little bit more personalized, particularly with this kind of work, the better off you're going to be in terms of being able to drive any type of result that you're trying to drive. Not to mention, what it allowed them to do was to get buy-in as well as support from that specific function to get the subject matter expertise that they needed. Because if you're in a centralized talent and L&D function, you're a smart person, but you don't necessarily know finance or you don't necessarily know the workflows of marketing in the way that the subject matter experts did. And then the other thing that I saw that was interesting, particularly around AI adoption and enablement, paired with this idea of being able to go function by function or business unit by business unit, was this idea of, let's try to map out where we figure we have the most likelihood of getting buy-in and support. And let's start there. And then we can use that as leverage to go to another business unit down the road and another business down the road. And so almost kind of this sequential kind of nature of approaching it, more aligned to kind of like, where is their opportunity and where is their interest? Because it's a hell of a lot easier to get buy-in from someone who's bought in than it is to get from a skeptic. And so I think, I think under the auspice of this, though, was just this general idea that, yes, getting a broad-based mandate is a reality that some people have to live with. And if you're trying to drive outcomes of any kind, like sometimes you have to work in a little bit more precise manner.
I'm glad you brought that up because I've been hearing from different talent leaders that, the CEO, the leadership team has sort of mandated or announced or been talking about the fact that we want to get everybody using AI more. We need to increase AI adoption. And part of that is technology. And we know the IT leaders are going out and getting the tech they need a lot of times, but a big part of it is mindset, right? And what are people believing? How do they feel about it? Do they feel safe? Is there psychological safety to go try things? Are you improving or encouraging innovation? And that's a great opportunity for talent development to get involved, right? And help people really understand the opportunity and the value. Obviously, we have no idea where things are going, and we know there are opportunities for people who adopt AI and are thinking innovatively. We also know that AI is going to change a lot of people's jobs, take a lot of people's jobs. Given that, do you get a sense that talent and learning leaders are feeling either optimistic or pessimistic about AI in general and their efforts in that space?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's a both and kind of thing. I think I would say most of the folks I talk to seem to be pretty clear-eyed, at least direct about what's going on, but also what possibly could be ahead. And I think a lot of them, I think come to the conclusion that, to your point, if we don't start acting now, or I would say, if we don't start acting now, we could be put in a disadvantaged position in terms of our ability to stay relevant and to stay impactful. I think one of the questions that I did ask, and I think this is really what showed me a little bit of who really was kind of really paying attention, was something to the effect of, what are we not talking about with respect to AI and talent that we should be talking about? And a lot of people brought up, things related to the workplace, but some of them brought up, things related more to society in general in terms of how that, impacts education or jobs or, work writ large, right? And so I think that at least in the folks that I talked to, there was a clear-eyed, nature of this in terms of acknowledging that we are experiencing a pretty incredible set of technologies that have really high potential, but also a reality of, look, like, not everything is rainbows and butterflies, as well as a little bit of understanding of math, at least in the corporate world. So I would say the clear-eyed is maybe the best word I can use to describe it. Of like, yeah, they seem to understand both the promises and the perils. But I also think, and then this is a little bit of a bias, but generally speaking, if you're working in talent and learning, I would assume you generally have a little bit of a disposition towards humans and people, and wanting to see them, succeed. And so I couldn't help but certainly also pick up on a little bit of urgency or interest in, like, hey, like, we probably, regardless of my role, regardless of what I'm doing here, we probably have somewhat of a duty of some kind to make sure that we start using this in a way that works for all people. And you can, not just in our organization, but broadly speaking for the workplace, because having a workplace writ large in our country, I think that is productive and that feels like engaged is probably for the better. And so, clear-eyed is probably the best way I could describe it.
I like that. The last part of your report is about perspectives, which relates closely to that of the profession. What did you find people were thinking about as it relates to the future of talent and learning?
It's a good one, and I'd be curious to hear what you think of this too, because you tend to talk to a lot of people as well. I think it's a couple things. I mean, I think there is a belief that we're not immune to this either. Just like, if you think about a company when they're doing, again, going back to the CEO or the leadership really encouraging people to kind of adopt AI and to figure out how they can use it in their roles, like, we're not immune to that. Like, we've got to do that ourselves too, right? And so I think that there was an acknowledgement that, like, it's not like we're included in this, and like, if we're doing the same thing in 5 years that we're doing today, we're probably not going to be in that great of a position. So I think there is that, like, element and piece. I think another element and piece is I think a number of people do recognize the potential that talent and learning can play during this time of transformation. And I think there's an acknowledgement that if we want to be able to do that, we also have to up-level ourselves in terms of how we go about how we work. There is a clear, at least to me, and talking with these people in the report, and I think you even highlighted it, like, there is a clear opportunity here in terms of really thinking about, in this new world of work, what is the role that humans and workers play, and how do we make sure that we've got a skilled workforce for that? But if we want to be able to deliver on that, we've got to also think differently about how we go about our role. And I would say that was, like, one of the big takeaways from this was that, and I think someone said to me something to the effect of, if we expect to have leaders that are change ready and adaptable, then we actually, one, have to model that ourselves, but two, we've also got to work in that kind of way. right? Like we
Hmm.
have to make sure that if we're putting out anything like a process, a program, an initiative of any kind, like it exhibits, though we've got to work in a way that exhibits that like we understand like that is the way to work. Like if that's what we're demanding from our leaders, like we've got to demand that from ourselves. And I think
Yeah.
collectively, that's probably something as a profession we could be doing better, right? I know it's done in pockets, but like collectively, like we could be doing that. And then the last thing I would just say, and this kind of came up a little bit in the beginning, where I talked about a little bit this idea of the barbells. And so one of the questions I did ask was really around, hey, like what kind of skills or things do you think are going to be important to this profession over the next 5 years? And it kind of ran the gamut on both sides. There is a kind of understanding, I think, that we're probably going to be using more technology in the future, not less. And so it'll be important for us to really understand how to use, utilize, work with, evaluate, AI systems and technology systems. And so there's probably some tech skills that we have to be comfortable with. But on the other side of that, like we also need to be able to be comfortable using human skills and to be really human in that regard too. And just kind of being able to really focus on both ends is going to be really critical. There's a lot to unpack in there, but I think like that general concept, I think is really critical and really important, for people who want to continue to thrive in
Yeah.
this profession for the future.
No doubt. The world of work is changing fast. AI is changing everything. The pace of change is faster than it's ever been before. And I don't want to get left behind. I don't want anyone else here to be left behind. I think we have to commit to staying on the cutting edge, to understand what the organization's goals and priorities are, to be more proactive than reactive, to be experimenting with the AI tools and talking with people in the organization about what they need, how you can better support leaders, to be, proactively out there figuring out what does the future look like and how do we help organizations get there and make sure that we're providing value proactively, being sort of entrepreneurial, which is, wrote a chapter about that in my new book with Mike Kim, Own Your Brand, Own Your Career, about like not just staying in your role, but looking for different ways to add value. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for talent development professionals to do that. You end your report by saying the future of talent and learning is not something that happens to us, it's something we co-create. And I love that. I think, as you know, I have a big focus on ownership and encouraging people to take ownership of the situation and say, okay, if it is going to be, it's up to me. I'm going to try to make things happen and get involved. What gives you the most optimism about the next chapter of this profession, talent development, and where do you see the biggest opportunities to lead?
It's a good question. So I'd say the first thing is like I really do think that the future still is for humans to create, like period. And while I don't think we need to treat these things as inevitable, I think we do have some agency and as collectively have choices about how we want to see things done. And so that's kind of why I say it is an invitation to co-create, because certainly there's going to be other people that are involved in this, but I view it more as an invitation to kind of step up and to say, hey, I have a point of view on what this could be and what maybe it should be, and to actually step up to the plate to help kind of shape what that is, and to not necessarily sit back and let it happen, and to take ownership of it. Um, to the second point, in terms of what collectively can we do, or what individually perhaps can we do to kind of be a part of this, I mean, I think the best thing with any of these things is always just to start exactly where you are, right? And every kind of big movement or every type of big change started because one person decided that they wanted to do things differently, or to do things in a slightly different way. And so I think part of it starts with showing up in terms of starting to kind of, as the trite saying goes, to kind of start to be the change that you want to see.
Mm-hmm.
Going off from there in terms of thinking about how you model this every day, it's a little bit about, all right, well, let's go out and find the others who kind of work in this kind of way or want to work in this kind of way. I always think that anything can be better when you decide to kind of put it in service of not just yourself, but of, perhaps others as well. And finding other people that who kind of share that mission, whatever it is, I think is really, really critical. I think certainly in any organization right now, particularly a Fortune 1000 company, there's no shortage of people who are thinking about AI. And so if this is you, I think it is on you. It is a good opportunity for you to think about, how could I get involved in my organization's efforts? There's so much that needs to be figured out. And there's no shortage of slices that you can kind of take hold of that. And then there's certainly a whole host of things that you can think about as an individual, in terms of in your community, in your church or wherever else you might sit. I really think this can extend, if you think about what we do in learning and talent, it extends far beyond just what we do within the four walls of our organization each and every day. I think there's a lot of applicable places where this could go into play, even at just outside of what we do for our day job.
Yeah, Al, this is great. Our listeners, of course, are readers. They're lifelong learners. They love to dive into details and think about what the future looks like. So for those listening who want to grab the report and read through the whole thing and really dive deeper into this, where is the best place for them to go?
Thanks. They can just go to the edgeofwork.com/report. We'll put a link in the show notes, but they should be able to find it there as well. And you can get a free copy. And if you end up reading it, I'd love to hear what you think, what resonates, what doesn't, what did I miss? I'm always looking for feedback. But we'll put a copy in the show notes for anyone who wants to take a read.
And Al is sharing a lot of these insights on LinkedIn as well, where he has 37,500 followers, just a few more than me right now on LinkedIn. And that's because he shares such great insights. So make sure you go follow Al on LinkedIn, go grab a copy of this report, go listen to the Edge of Work podcast. Al, this has been fantastic. Thanks again for coming back on the show, for sharing everything from this report. I am looking forward to talking with you more and keeping in touch and seeing where everything goes.
Thanks, Andy, as always. I really appreciate it.